Shalom, this is Daniel once again with Bless Israel Network. And the conflict has now come to an end, the most recent conflict. However, I'd like to summarize a little bit about it and give you some of my thoughts and then sort of wrap it all up with a, well, let's just say a godly, heavenly, biblical, spiritual perspective. So, yeah, I'm recording this a day after the conflict officially came to an end in the form of a ceasefire. So, was it a victory in terms of what we typically define as a military victory? No. Both sides are claiming victory, but was it an actual victory? No. And I have to admit, I, along with a large number of other people, including the vast majority of Israelis, are not pleased that there's a ceasefire. Why? Well, usually when you enter into a conflict where there's artillery exchange and weapons and, you know, bombs and this kind of stuff, there's usually a victor. That's typically what happens. But in the Middle East, when it comes to Israel and Hamas, this has been a cycle. And this most recent conflict turned out to be a carbon copy of everything that's happened before. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu is making all kinds of statements that, oh, we, struck them hard, we, reduced their capacity, we weakened them. Fine. I mean, I understand that. He's got to be the head cheerleader and so on. But in reality, has anything changed? No. As a matter of fact, if anything has happened, I think from a PR standpoint, Hamas has actually come out shining a little bit. Why do I say that? Well, if you recall, prior to when the conflict began, there were issues going on which were, in essence, creating a tug of war in terms of who is officially representing the Arab Palestinians. Okay, I put Palestinians in quotes because, as you probably or should know, there are no such people as Palestinians. They're all Arabs. They're from different countries, but they're all Arabs. Yasser Arafat renamed them Palestinians in 1967. They didn't move. They didn't change their ethnicity, but they went from being Lebanese or Jordanian or Egyptian or, Saudi Arabia, Saudis or Moroccan or what have you. They suddenly became Palestinians. Our longtime friend, who we haven't seen for a number of years, Walid Shabat, a former Muslim terrorist who became a believer. He was a terrorist at the time of the Six-Day War. He was living in Jericho at the time. And Jericho was actually not formally part of Israel. And he said, I went to bed on June 4th, and I was a Jordanian. I woke up the next day, and the Six-Day War had started, and suddenly I became a Palestinian. I hadn't moved. I hadn't changed my religion. I hadn't changed anything. But suddenly I went from being a Jordanian to a Palestinian. So it's made up, and we shouldn't give life to something that's made up. Just like West Bank, it's Judea Samaria. Just like East Jerusalem, there's no such place as East Jerusalem. It's Eastern Jerusalem. East Jerusalem connotes a separate city. It's not. It's Jerusalem. So as far as the tug of war is concerned, from a PR standpoint, Mahmoud Abbas is head of the Palestinian Authority. And he pretty much runs what the world calls the West Bank, but it's Judea Samaria. They used to be in Gaza, but in 2006 there was an election. Hamas won, and 1 year later Hamas had a violent coup, overthrew the Palestinian Authority, and they've been out of Gaza ever since. but he still vies for being the official representative. And so does Hamas. And in this case, there was supposed to be elections which were going to take place within the, quote, Palestinian family, if you will. And Abbas canceled them because he didn't think that what he was hoping to happen was going to happen, so he canceled them. In the meantime, Hamas starts thinking to itself, gee, we need to do something to enhance our position and be recognized as the official leaders of the Palestinians. So they used an excuse, and here's the excuse. In a neighborhood in eastern Jerusalem, there have been Arab squatters for decades. The property has been in ownership of the Jews for decades. They have allowed Arab squatters to live there all this time. They have told them they need to pay rent. They've told it again and again and again. The Arab Palestinians have refused to pay rent. So finally, the Jews got fed up and they said, you're going to have to leave. You can't stay here anymore without paying rent. We own the property. Doesn't matter whether you're Arab, Palestinians, or whatever. You still owe us rent. We're the property owners. So when this happened, the Muslims went nuts and started rioting in Al-Aqsa Mosque on Temple Mount. The police came in to sort of calm down the rioting. The situation got worse, and pretty soon rockets are flying from Gaza. Okay, this is how Hamas reacted to the fact that the Israeli police were trying to quell a riot based on the fact that Arabs were going to be thrown out of property that they had been squatting in for decades. This is how it began. So in the meantime, the conflict continues, puts Abbas on the sideline. Hamas now considers itself, as a result of 11 days of fighting, which included 4,300 rockets. That's an average of 370 rockets per day for 11 consecutive days. Imagine 370 rockets a day in a 24-hour cycle, 11 days. So Hamas is now stating, since the ceasefire has taken place, that they are the ones who are in charge of the Arab Palestinians. It's not Mahmoud Abbas. Okay, so they say that. Let them. They can say whatever they want. Mahmoud Abbas is recognized by President Biden as the leader of the Palestinians. So this family internal issue amongst the Arab Palestinians is still not resolved. What did Israel gain from this? Benjamin Netanyahu says that Hamas was degraded. They took out a lot of their leadership. Okay, well, he can say that if he wants to. I know they struck many targets. They did kill some of their leadership, but has it actually altered the situation on the ground as far as Hamas is concerned? Let me show you the reaction of the leadership of Hamas after the conflict ended. So, does that give you the sense that Hamas feels that they have been degraded? No. As a matter of fact, what that statement confirms is that Hamas is never going to enter into a peaceful, coexistent, two-state solution with the Jewish nation of Israel. They are absolutely committed to making sure there is never a two-state solution. Okay? In fact, their goal is the destruction of Israel. There will never be normalization with Israel. It's not going to happen. Hamas refuses to accept it because they are Muslim fundamentalists. Their holy religion calls them to destroy Israel and take over all the land currently that is Israel. So, did Netanyahu accomplish anything? Not really. Somehow or other, the cycle of violence, reoccurring violence, needs to end. But between you and I don't see how unless something extremely significant takes place. For example, Israel vacated Gaza in 2005. They left all kinds of structures there. They gave them to the Arabs. This is our gesture for peace. We make a bold sacrifice. And what did they do when the Arabs inherited it and all the Jews were, Israel literally dragged in some cases, 9,000 Jews who had lived in Gaza for 38 years, dragged them out, some screaming and what have you. It was horrible. Almost brought Israel to civil war. And what did Hamas do? What did the Arabs do? They destroyed every single structure that was left. They wanted nothing to do with it. They leveled everything. I would say, hey, thank you. You gave us this land. You gave us these structures. That's nice. We're ready to live side by side in peace with you. No, there's Jewish stuff. We want nothing to do with it. So they destroyed it all. So since then, there's been at least 4 different conflicts that have erupted between Israel and Hamas, and there's no end in sight. So what's going to change? Does Israel need to go back in and occupy Gaza again? Maybe. I don't know. But right now, the situation is very tense. There was no victory by either side, and with President Biden saying that he will discuss future peace gestures, if you will, or peace options with Mahmoud Abbas, that leaves Hamas out of the picture. So I'm sure they're not happy about that. So stay tuned, because this is not going to end. But what I wanted to, a couple other things I wanted to share with you, which are noteworthy. The timing of when Biden, who is the one that really demanded the ceasefire, and Israelis are not happy that Netanyahu capitulated. But here's how events unfolded. On the 18th, okay, just a few days ago, Biden was in Michigan speaking, and Michigan has an Arab Muslim congresswoman who was legally elected and sits in the government of the U.S. Her name is Rashida Tlaib. She harangued President Biden as he was leaving, okay? And she bent his ear for 8 minutes on the tarmac. You see that? That is her yakking at President Biden and his wife Jill next to him. And she is filling his head with the most vitriolic, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel lies that you possibly can imagine. Now, this woman, she does not condemn the Holocaust. In fact, she has her own version of the Holocaust. Let me read you a direct quote, okay, how she feels about the Holocaust. Quote, "There's kind of a calming feeling I always tell folks when I think of the Holocaust and the tragedy of the Holocaust and the fact that it was my ancestors, Palestinians, who lost their land and some lost their lives, their livelihood, their human dignity, their existence in many ways, have been wiped clean, and some people's passports as well." So what is she saying there? The Holocaust, as far as she's concerned, is what they call the Nakba, when Israel became a newly born independent nation in 1948. She calls that the Holocaust. And she is a member of the United States Congress. This is not the Democratic Party of JFK, my friends. Not at all. One day, actually less than one day, after she yacked Biden's ear off, okay, and made these horrible statements to him, Biden tells Netanyahu it's time to de-escalate. Now, I could be wrong, but it's entirely possible that this Palestinian Muslim member of Congress who hates Israel convinced President Biden that he now needs to stop the conflict, which prevented Israel from accomplishing its goal of seriously degrading Hamas to the point where they couldn't do any more damage. I don't know for sure. I can only see the circumstantial evidence that she grabbed Biden, she spoke with him for 8 minutes on the tarmac, and after that, he calls for a ceasefire. What do I know? Okay, so we are now into the early stages of a tense ceasefire. How should we view what's happened from a biblical perspective, from a spiritual, from a godly perspective? I'm going to share some stuff with you for a moment or two that may surprise you. I believe that there is a misunderstanding of what the Jewish people should be doing instead of what they have been doing. The Jewish people in Israel, and I understand this to an extent, they have a very strong military. They have to. They have a strong economy. Technologically, they're the most advanced country in the world next to Silicon Valley. They've blessed the world, including the Muslims, with all kinds of technological advances. But I want to ask you a question. Is Israel relying on God? Has Israel returned to Torah? The answer to both of those questions is largely no. And there's another part to this which Christians play a role in. Have the Christians recognized who the Jewish Messiah is? Or has Christians continued to recognize only Jesus in a replacement theology perspective? In other words, the New Testament replaced the Old Testament. The Christians replaced the Jews as far as God's chosen people are concerned. Jesus, Yeshua, did away with Torah. We don't have to. So these are fundamental questions. Now, from our perspective at Bless Israel Network, we believe that the Jews need to be who God created them to be, which is a light to the nations. The Christians play a very important role. When the Christians en masse recognize Yeshua, understand the importance of Torah, while they don't necessarily have to obey Torah like the Jews do. The Jews have a greater obligation to obey Torah. The Christians are invited to, okay, and welcome to. So at least two things need to take place. The Christians should recognize who the Jewish Messiah is. The Jews need to start obeying Torah en masse and become a light to the nations, which will be spurred to them. They'll be motivated because the Christians will recognize who the Jewish Messiah is. This is what we believe needs to take place. And instead, Israel is relying on their military might. Someone once said, I don't recall who, but someone once said, the more Israel relies on man-made solutions, the less they're relying on God. Well, I don't think Israel should just sit there and do nothing if Hamas fires rockets at them. I understand that. And the international community really needs to play a role in being more fair, because the international community has been overwhelmingly anti-Israel, and it proves one of two things. Either they are ignorant and they don't understand the situation, or they're largely anti-Semitic, or both. I don't know. So if the ball gets moved into the spiritual court and Jews start obeying Torah and Christians motivate the Jews by recognizing who the Jewish Messiah is, and the Jews then become a light to the nations, wow, that's what we want. That's what we want. Come, Yeshua, come. So that's my 2 cents. I hope this message has blessed you. Once again, this is Dan with Bless Israel Network. Drop us a note. Subscribe to our mailing list. Please consider supporting us. You can get in contact with us on our website, blessisraelnetwork.com. And stay tuned, because you never know. Circumstances may require another message soon, but for now I'll sign off and say thank you very much for watching, and I hope it's blessed you.